Listeners, we will get to intros, but before we do that, Joe, I'd like to ask you to tell us something that you believe about multifamily that might surprise us.
The number 284,000. That number represents the amount of apartments completed through the first half of this year. And it is significant because the average amount of apartments completed for a full calendar year over the last 2 decades is 217,000. So just through the first half of this year, it has exceeded what the average completions are for the entire year for the last 2 decades. And here's some context. That number doesn't really matter. The reason why is because there's still 3.2 million deficit households that need housing. So 3.2 million people who could still get in, who still need housing. So you look at the historical numbers for how many apartments have been completed this year, and it's a lot relative to what we have been doing, but it's not even a drop in the bucket for what is needed. So there's a lot of demand that is out there for apartments, even during these historically once in generation time where supply is flooding the market.
Listeners, welcome to the source of commercial real estate, where we talk to the experts in residential commercial real estate so you can grow your business, find a competitive advantage, and use real estate to live the life that you want. I am your host, Jonathan Hayek, and I'm a former public school teacher who found financial freedom through residential real estate investing, and now I invest in commercial properties, particularly small industrial properties. And today, you know that voice. I am talking with Joe Fairless. Joe is the co-founder of Ashcroft Capital, which has over $2.8 billion of assets under management. And Joe has been recognized as Multifamily Investor of the Year by Think Realty Magazine. Joe created the podcast, Best Real Estate Investing Advice Ever Show, which is the longest running daily real estate podcast in the world and generates over 500,000 monthly downloads. Joe is also a proud member of the Texas Tech Alumni Advisor Board for the College of Media and Communications, as well as being recognized as an outstanding alumni at Texas Tech University, where I didn't know this, where he is a former adjunct professor. He's an active volunteer for Junior Achievement and at Crossroads Hospice. And he and his wife created the Best Ever Causes, which has proudly supported 76 different nonprofits over the last 72 months. I could go on and on with Joe's accolades, but that's enough for now. We will get into a little bit more. Joe, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
Well, it's my pleasure, and always enjoy our conversations. We've had conversations a couple times in this format, and you come with some really unique questions and well researched questions. So I'm looking forward to this, and my goal is to add value to your listeners.
Well, Joe, I'm sure a lot of listeners already are familiar with your story, but in case people are not familiar with your story, why don't we start out with your background and how you got involved in real estate?
Sure. So I'm from Texas originally. Well, I guess I was born in Flint, Michigan, and then we moved to Texas when I was 3. And I grew up in Texas. I went to Texas Tech University. I graduated Texas Tech and then went straight to New York City after I graduated. And I was making $30,000 as a junior project manager at an advertising agency on Madison Avenue, which doesn't get you too far in New York City. I was living in East Flatbush, Brooklyn for a year, and then lived in East Village for 9 years after that. I always had a roommate. 9 out of 10 years. The first year I didn't. Then 9 out of 10 years, the remaining 9 years I did. I had a roommate. Lived in an apartment the size of everyone's closet, in their bedroom, and it was just 2 bedrooms, 1 hallway, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen. There's no living room. There's a dorm style fridge. No central AC. New York City gets hot in the summertime. Learned a lesson on having not having a window unit AC in a windowless bedroom that can slightly cool you down if you put your face right in front of it, but then there's a lot of hot air that comes out over top and actually it's like boiling a frog. It like warms you up and it actually gets really hot in your room. Plus probably carbon monoxide poisoning, so there's that. So don't do that. Don't make sure you have a window if you have a window unit AC. And as I was, making my way through my career from 30K upwards to I became the youngest vice president of an agency in New York. I was making 150K. I realized that I wasn't fulfilled by what I was doing. And I had a monetary goal, but once I achieved that, which was making 100K, it was just, I wasn't enjoying it. And so I started I started sampling life experiences. I started doing things while having my full-time job that I was sampling certain things to see what I wanted to do after I left the advertising industry. And one of the things I had been doing about 5 years after I graduated, once I started making some money and be able to save some money, I I saved up 20K and I bought my first house. It was a house for $76,000 in Duncanville, Texas, 1051 Gaynor Avenue, if anyone wants to look it up. Bought it in like October of 2009, I believe, for 76K. And I bought another one the next year for 10% down. So I was like all in like 12K. I saved. Then another all cash, but I did a cash out refinance. I got all my money back out. And then a fourth one, I got it with a line of credit at American Airlines Credit Union. And this is like a 40K line of credit. Bought it from a wholesaler for 30,000 and put in 5K, and turns out I need to put in like 10 more K. So I pretty much broke even because I lucked out with appreciation in that market. But the other 3 homes are really, really nice homes. I ended up selling them about 8 years later for about 100K profit on each of the three, about 100K profit on each of the three. And so I did that though, because what I realized early on is that on paper, the properties made money, but in reality, when someone would move out, it cost $5,000, and that would wipe away the $250 worth a month profit I made on paper. And so really it was an appreciation play, and I wasn't able to save up enough money to acquire them to make a difference in my monthly passive income with single family homes. Now I know other people have done it properly and it is possible, but how I was doing it was not. And so I realized, well, there's got to be something bigger and better I can do. So I started teaching people how to do what I was doing. And in the and while at one of those classes, that's investing in Texas, where the numbers make sense, even though people are living in New York City who I was teaching. And I heard a couple people tell me, my former boss at the time told me, hey, if you ever do something larger, let me know. This looks interesting, but I don't want any part of putting all the pieces in place. So if you ever do something larger, I'm in passively. And I realized that I had a product, or I had customers before I had a product. And that's a very desirable place to be as a budding entrepreneur. And at that point, I started studying apartment buildings, and then I ended up getting my first property in Cincinnati. Probably a couple years after I started studying
it. Joe, before you started dabbling in real estate and these single families in Texas, what were you hoping to achieve in New York City? Were you trying to live out like a Don Draper Mad Men style fantasy, or what were your intentions of going from Texas to New York City?
I had one intention, and that was to compete with the best of the best in advertising, because that's the industry I chose, for 5 years, and then go back to Dallas, Fort Worth, where I was from, and leapfrog those who started at the same time I did, because I had the big agency New York City experience. That was my plan. I was there for 10 years, and I chose to stay there versus go back to Dallas Fort Worth because of the opportunities there as a advertising marketing professional. And it's just a lot of fun too, as a single young professional, being able to walk to the bars and get a slice of pizza and hang out with your friends. And it's just a really cool community, and a really cool place to be as a single young professional. But as I grew up and became a real adult, as someone who now I'm married 7 or 8 years, one or the other, 7 to 8 years, and have a child. She's 5.5. Not New York City, not the place, but during that time was amazing, and that's why I originally went there.
So, continuing on your journey into commercial real estate, you have this realization that single family homes are probably not going to get you to the place where you want to get. And so you start studying large apartment complexes and apartment syndication. And you've publicly talked about your first deal in Cincinnati that did not go well. But we know as of this point, up to $2.8 billion in assets, you eventually figured it out. So, can you tell us a little bit more about your intentions when you started with apartment syndication? What were you hoping for? And did you ever think that you'd ever get to $2.8 billion in assets and eventually beyond?
I'll answer the last question first. Absolutely not. I that wasn't in the plans. When I started out, my goal was to earn a living as a real estate investor who didn't have to rely on a W-2 income from non-real estate activity. I was terrified, not terrified, but I was I was acutely aware of how demoralized I would be if I needed to go back to the advertising industry after throwing my hat in the ring to be a real estate entrepreneur. And I use that as motivation to continue to proceed and blaze a path forward. So being a real estate entrepreneur uh, was something I wanted, but my first deal that I wanted to do was going to be a 30 unit. It ended up being 168 unit. So I was trying to do a $1 million purchase, which was a really big deal considering my largest purchase to date had been $81,000. And that was a second home that I bought. So $1 million, 10x that puppy. And I thought I could raise about $300,000 to buy $1 million property. Now, shows what I knew at the time. You don't raise $300,000 to buy $1 million property. You probably raise around $500,000 because you got to pay for capex and reserves and all sorts of things. But I was learning, and the reason I went to Tulsa, Oklahoma, because that was the market I had identified, and I met with the brokers. I toured properties, I made offers, and I got no response from any of the owners. I was an out-of-state buyer with no track record who nobody knew of. And no proof of funds. So I wouldn't sell to me, so I understand that. So I ended up looking at a property in Cincinnati that someone showed me that was a creative financing deal as a master lease with option to purchase. And that allowed me to get into a larger property It was worth about $6 million, when 6.2 million, and with a much lower threshold for money up front. I ended up raising 1.2 million, 833,000 from 12 investors, and then the brokers put in their commissions to round it out to about 1.2 million. To control, not buy. Technically, we controlled it. The 168 unit apartment community. So yeah, it was a it was right out of the gate. Uh, you know, jumping into the deep end on a purchase, and I certainly learned my lessons on that deal.
So fast forward to present day, and Ashcroft Capital has certainly figured it out. You have an impressive portfolio, and we've had a difficult last few years. And I actually want to leave it a little more open-ended than that. Over the last few years, there has been maybe a lot of hype for people expecting distress and expecting huge buying opportunities, even starting 12 to 18 months ago. And I'd like to ask you if you have experienced that distress, not as an owner, but as a buyer. And if not, are you surprised that there hasn't been the amount of distress that people were expecting?
Well, I'll answer it as a buyer and an owner. So as an owner, we did our first capital call, and that was last April. It was for our first fund, and the fund had some floating interest rate loans, and we have rate caps on those loans, but those rate caps expire, and so we needed to do a capital call, and we did, and we called every one of the investors. There's 1,097 of the investors in there, so it's a decent amount of people. Talked to about 75-80% of them. Called all of them, but talked to about 75-80% of them, and had a high degree of participation in it because we have a plan. Because from my perspective, it's not about not making mistakes. It's about taking ownership over the mistakes that you make and coming up with a plan to solve what needs to be solved for. So specifically with that, we are putting fixed interest rate agency debt on the three largest loans. It makes up about 50% of the total debt on the properties, or on the portfolio across 8 properties. And the remaining 5 properties, we're going to grow NOI and sell whenever it makes sense to do so. So I'd say that is a microcosm of what others are experiencing. And you'll notice I didn't say that we sold anything. And the reason why we didn't sell anything, and the reason why others are not selling as much as people thought they would, is because it's pretty clear what's going to take place from a supply-demand dynamic starting in mid-2025 through 2028. And that is that the new construction that I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation is going to plummet, and the deliveries, the completed units will plummet, and the demand will skyrocket as a result of the lower supply. And if you think about the last 3 months, the national occupancy, and I get it, real estate's on a local level, but just to have a conversation, let's just talk about the national picture. The national occupancy for the last 3 months for multifamily has been 94.2% for the last 3 months. And it has been, as I mentioned at the beginning, 284,000 apartments have been completed for the first half of this year. And that's more than the average of the whole calendar year for over the last 2 decades. So there's been a historic number of new apartments completed, but yet the national occupancies holding at 94%. That's incredible. So what's going to happen when the apartments are not going to be completed? It's going to be, they're going to go down on completions. The demand's still going to be there, and consumers right now, they're out earning their debt. That's the best way to put it. 46% of people who have credit cards are still paying bills for the stuff they bought last summer. I mean, almost half of Americans are paying bills on their credit card for stuff they bought last summer. And they're okay right now. The average net worth has been increasing because they've been out earning their debt, but there's still a lot of debt. And so if anything were to shake things up from, a black swan event or policy change or something else, maybe the Fed doesn't, lower interest rates fast enough. They don't see it in time. There's going to be trouble, and there's going to be a lot more renters because people don't buy during that time, they rent. So that's why you asked, am I seeing buying opportunities and distress? Occasionally, but overall, not really. Because most multifamily operators and lenders see that. And it's interesting, lenders will take back apartments from the owners. Like they're okay getting, if an owner is in distress, they're okay not working things out, generally speaking, with a multifamily owner versus an office owner versus retail or self-storage, because they don't want the office. They don't want self-storage back. The banks don't. What are they going to do on their balance sheet with that? But they see the writing on the wall, and it proves it out. I went to a Neil, I forget his last name, but he attended the conference. Neil Balwa, amazing speaker if you see him in person. But he presented on this, and he showed in charts that lenders take back properties, commercial properties, take back apartments, but not the other ones. So which is a good and bad thing, right? And so there are a lot of workouts because of that. You put on pref, you do a capital call. What we have right now is we have a unique opportunity. You mentioned, are we seeing opportunities? Not really, but when they come across your desk, you jump on it. We have a deal in Orlando that we're raising money for, and it's a 2021 construction at a 5.5 cap. The tenants on average make $115,000 a year, and the purchase is about 10% below replacement cost. So when you're buying in a, and it's got it's an A- school district. So when you're buying in that type of area, when cap rates are projected to decrease over the next 4 or 5 years, even if they don't, you're still buying a good cash flow play that is a pretty stable, solid investment. And so I think right now is a great time to buy if you can find the opportunities. In this case, the seller needs to sell, loans maturing, they don't want to do a capital call, and they can basically get their investors to break even. And so they decided to sell. And so there will be some of those opportunities, and my suggestion is capitalize on those opportunities as operators when you see them, because for the next 12 months, we will see the same type of headlines that we're currently seeing. And those headlines are occupants or supply is flooding the market with apartments, historic completions taking place. They're all right. There are historic completions taking place, but occupancy is remaining at 94% despite all that. And then the spigot's going to be turned off with completions. And you're going to see rent increases. You will see occupancy shoot up. You will see that starting in 2026, halfway through to 2026 to 2028, you're going to see it to be a very desirable time to be an owner of multifamily.
Really helpful and in-depth insight there, Joe. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on why multifamily is a great investment now and over the next 4 or 5 years. It sounds like owners experiencing distress right now are just going to try to hold on for as long as they possibly can, and those that can't hold on or raise the extra capital are selling. That's where you're capitalizing on that deal in Orlando. But by and large, it seems like there's been a lower amount of distress because owners know what's coming down the pipe and over the next few years, and they know that if they can just hold on for a little bit, that they're going to be rewarded for making those good decisions. So, thank you so much for sharing your experience there and what you're experiencing in the market. I want to ask you about kind of changing positions as a limited partner. I read in your bio that you have an LP position in over 100 different deals, which is mind-boggling. And so I'd love to ask you just kind of an open-ended question about what you're experiencing as an LP in terms of, I'm going to assume that some of the deals that you're a part of are performing and some are maybe not performing as expected. And so I'd love to just find out from you, from your perspective, what is separating the deals and or operators, the ones that are performing and the ones that are not performing?
Your assumption is correct. And what is separating the ones that are not versus are would be two things. One is the type of debt, and two is the operations. Those are the two things that separate the deals. So I was just looking at it earlier for something else. A lender had a question. We're buying that deal, and so they're wondering, where the passive investments I'm in, or how many I'm in. And so I'm in 123 deals as an LP, and that includes Ashcroft deals. So I'm I think our third largest investor in terms of dollar size, passive LP, but I'm also obviously the co-founder and GP too, actively involved. So 123, including the Ashcroft deals. I'm with over 50 different operators as a passive investor, and apartment buildings with fixed interest rates doing amazing, generally speaking. Apartment buildings with floating debt but rate caps, generally they're paused. Apartment buildings with floating rate caps and poor operations, generally they're in big time trouble. Out of the 123 deals, there's one deal that they were foreclosed on. Again, as a passive investor, just so I'm clear, I was a passive investor in this. It was foreclosed. So I lost $100,000 on that deal. There's, the GP says that the lender might keep the LPs on for, I don't know why they would do that, but the carrot's still dangling that maybe we didn't lose all the money, but I'm pretty sure we did. That was because operations and debt. What I've seen is that if there are those two things present, poor operations and floating debt, with rate caps expiring, you're toast. So we put a lot of focus on, obviously, understandably, operations. We have our own property management company. We have over 400 employees at the property management company. We only manage our properties, and that's it. And we're vertically integrated. We buy our product directly from Asia. ships to our Dallas Fort Worth warehouse. We have a little mini Amazon where we kit the product and then ship it out. I'm not aware of any other group that does that, and we save on compared to retail pricing upwards of 30% on renovation materials, which helps us with the bottom line. And so, as a passive investor, what I look for now is clearly the debt, what type of debt, but then also from an operations standpoint, are the people who are presenting it to me actually overseeing the operations? If not, who is? Because there are a decent amount of people who raise money for deals, but they don't have any influence over the operations or even how the deal, the major decisions are made. And so I only want to work with people who are owner operators, people who are actually operating the property, and it is their investment. They're the decision makers, because then I want to know about their track record, because it doesn't really matter if someone who's raising money has a track record if they don't have decision making power on that particular deal. And I've seen it time and time again where there's been a lot of GPs and co-sponsors, whatever they're called, who are on a deal that I'm a passive investor on, and they don't have any influence, a real influence, because they aren't legally the people who are allowed to make the decisions. So those are the two things I look at and look for.
Joe, I just want to sort of validate and recognize your transparency in sort of coming clean and admitting that some of the deals that you're a part of aren't going well. And I'm sure that can be humbling as someone in your position. I'm reminded of I was listening to a podcast recently with Scott Trench, the CEO of Bigger Pockets, and he was doing a podcast with Whitney Sewell. And he also admitted that he was a part of some passive investments in which he was expecting to lose 100% of his passive investment. And, he came from a perspective of, hey, I'm supposed to know this stuff, and even I'm getting hosed on these deals. And so, it can be humbling, and a lot of other people would choose to not disclose that some of the deals in which you're passive investing aren't going well. And you even mentioned earlier that Ashcroft had their first ever capital call. And so I think it says a lot about your integrity and your character that you'll admit even when things are not going well. It doesn't mean you're not in the position that you are because you're a perfect person or you're a perfect investor, but you can be flexible, and you can rebound from mistakes and make a plan of action moving forward to correct those mistakes. And so just wanted to validate that for you, Joe.
Thank you.
Sure. I want to be mindful of your time. We have a few minutes left, but one of the things that I admire about you is just what I mentioned, your character and your integrity. And I think a lot of people follow you and the Best Ever podcast and the Best Ever conference and Best Ever brand is because of who you are as a person. And so I'd love to ask you just a couple questions that get more on your background and how you see the world. And so one pattern that I see with you, Joe, is that in your background, you've just always been a very high achiever, just in everything that you've done. Going to New York City and wanting to get to the top so that you can go back to Dallas and overstep everyone else in that smaller Dallas advertising market, and then building Ashcroft to what it is, building the Best Ever podcast, a daily, not just a weekly podcast, but a daily podcast with 500,000 monthly downloads, and I think now over 3,000 episodes, which is mind-boggling. So the pattern that I see with you is just very high achieving, very determined. And so I'm wondering, is there anything that you can point to in your past, either with how you were brought up with your parents or any other mentors or any other experiences that caused you to be such a highly driven person as an adult?
Hmm. Um, I would say that one thing that comes to mind is um, momentum creates more momentum. Like small steps create big, big progress. And one thing I'm thinking of is, yeah, I'm the youngest of four kids, uh, but I'm the youngest by far. My brother, who's closest in age to me, is 8 years older than me. I have a sister who's 10 years older than me. I have another brother who's 12 years older than me. So I'm the youngest by far. I was um, an unexpected surprise, I believe. And I bring that up because I remember my brother, who's closest in age to me. Um, you know, he's 8 years older than me. So I was 10, he was 18. I remember playing football with his friends. We lived in an apartment building after my parents divorced. And but the apartment building happened to have this, large grassy area right next to it. And so we would play football. And I was 10. He was, his friends were seniors in high school. He was a senior in high school. And I would be able to compete with the worst of them. I'd be able to burn the worst of them, and he's probably like a offensive tackle, and I was just running as quick as I could. So by no means is it impressive, but it was something that I remember. He always allowed me to play with them, and that gave me confidence. That gave me some small momentum because I was competing against people who were 8 years older than me, and it was giving me confidence. So I think two things there. One, small momentum leads to big momentum, and then two, competing against people who are much better than you, much bigger than you, will elevate your game. And I ended up doing pretty well in football. We won the state championship my junior year in Texas, which is a thing. And I played Division III football for a year, and I was on the junior varsity team. So by no means are they retiring, hanging up my cleats and making them golden and putting them in a trophy case. Like, I saw the writing on the wall. And then I went to Texas Tech and just became a college student. But competing against people who are better than you and more savvy than you, going from Lubbock, Texas to New York City right out of the gate, I'm competing with people who are much better than me, savvier than me, more experienced than me, know the culture already than ignorant me coming from Texas going into the Lions Den, New York City. I think that's an important takeaway. And so how can we apply it? Well, I applied it recently as a month ago when I went and played pickleball with my buddy against these much older men who smoked me in pickleball. And it's just because they were better than me, and so it was humbling, but it's necessary for us to get better.
It's really funny that you mentioned pickleball because that's exactly where my mind went. I play pickleball every week, and I'm pretty much a novice. And you play with these people that are 30, sometimes 40 years older than you, and you think, all right, I'm going to have to go easy on these guys. And you get in there, and they totally smoke you. And the only way to get better at pickleball is to play with people that are better than you, and you learn their strategy, you learn what they're doing, and you learn that I know this is highly specific, but in pickleball, it's not about how hard you can hit the ball. It's about strategy. And
Yes.
that's why 70 and 80-year-olds can beat 30 somethings. So
Yes.
that's really, I think, a great metaphor, a great theme for life, to as much as you can be around people that are better than you, and just be humble and pick up things that they're doing, and it's such a great learning lesson. Joe, I'm looking behind you and I see a clock, and I think that's the clock that is
Yeah.
counting down to your 90th
Yeah.
birthday. Can you explain why you have a clock in your office counting down to your 90th birthday?
17,608 days. Yeah, it's just a reminder. I started out as a death clock. My wife didn't like that. So now it's a 90th birthday clock. And I tend to agree with her now. I think it's better to try to live past 90. So now it's 90th birthday clock. It's a reminder that every moment matters. On my vision board, I have a huge quote for this year. It says, "Cherish every moment. Cherish every moment." So it's just, our time is limited, very much so, and you never know when it's up. That's a blessing and a curse of this life that we live. So cherish every moment, and that is a physical reminder that these moments are ticking by. So make sure I make the most of them.
How does, the clock and the quote, cherish every moment, how does that translate to your everyday life and decision making and how you spend your time?
Being intentional about being present when wherever I am. If I'm in this conversation, I'm in this conversation. You will never ever see me in public in a conversation and also looking at my phone ever. I'm fully locked in. I'm fully engaged because this is what matters. Like, these relationships matter. You know, that's what I care about. So it's being intentional and engaged to be present wherever I'm at.
Joe, as we wrap up our conversation, I want to ask you to reflect on the current time that we're in and the last few years, the roller coaster that real estate and maybe your personal life too, that has been, 2020 through 2024. And I'm wondering 10 years from now, looking back on this time, the incredible run up that we had 2020 through mid 2022, and then the really difficult times that we've had in 2023 and 2024. 10 years from now, you look back on this period in your professional life and personal life. What do you believe are going to be your biggest lessons and takeaways from this period?
Uh, Fixed interest rate debt. Floating it has a purpose. We've sold 26 deals. We've taken 26 deals full cycle, and that's have an average return to our investors of 25.2% cash on cash. So there was a purpose. There was a use case for floating because that helped us get out without penalties. But there's also an argument, a louder argument to be made for fixed. So at the very very minimum, if you buy floating, then buy it for buy a rate cap for a much longer period of time. So there's one tactical takeaway. And then another is it's a period of time where I am so grateful that it took place because it 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 allowed me to continue to be leaner and stronger, and allowed our team to be stronger. And as with all challenges, you either when you're going through it as a group, you're either going to grow apart or come closer together. And it depends on the actions of typically the leader and how the mindset and the communication style that they have. And I believe the team, our investors included, have grown closer together as a result of this. And 10 years from now, I'll also be thinking, and I wish we would have been able to raise even more money during that period of time. I'm talking about the over now through the next 12 months, because this now through the next 12 months are going to be the best buying time for multifamily, because people are starting to become aware of what's taking place, but they're not really acting on it. Um, but after 12 months, it's going to be too late. And then, prices are going to be higher and you'll have missed a window of opportunity.
Joe Fairless, he's the co-founder of Ashcroft Capital and the Best Ever Brand, Best Ever Real Estate Investing Advice Ever podcast, the Best Ever Conference, the premier commercial real estate investing conference. Joe, I want to thank you so much for your generosity of time and expertise today. Just really appreciate you sharing it with us.
Hey, grateful for the conversation.
If listeners want to connect with you, where would you like to send people?
You can go to ashcroftcapital.com and then you can look at current offerings and you can see that deal I mentioned earlier, Braxton, and you can watch a video on it and learn more.
Joe, thank you so much.
All right. Thanks.
Listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation, feel free to reach out to either one of us. We love talking about commercial real estate, and we would love to connect with you. We've got another great interview coming at you next week, so be sure to come back and listen to that. Thank you so much for listening. We appreciate you. Take care.